Hello, everybody. Welcome to A Mighty Blaze's Lit Fic. The blaze was sparked in 2020 when COVID-19 extinguished the traditional in-person book tour, and our New York Times bestselling authors and co-founders, Caroline Levitt and Jenna Blum, joined forces to do virtual promotions and promote new books coming out and new audiobooks coming out, which is the case today. So today we have Allison Carmen, author of The Gift of Maybe, which just had a new audiobook version come out. Allison Carmen has a BA in accounting, a JD of law, a master's of law and taxation. She worked for a large law firm in Manhattan and then founded her own law firm, built a successful practice focusing on real estate, taxation, a lot of other things. And after 15 years, she transitioned into business consulting, coaching, and life coaching. And she also wrote the book, The Gift of Maybe, Finding Hope and Possibility in Uncertain Times, also A Year Without Men. And she has an amazing podcast that I will also link in our comments. So Allison's best-selling print book, The Gift of Maybe, which is now available as an audiobook narrated by Kim Nimi, which I hope I'm saying her last name right. I should have asked. Okay, perfect. The audiobook is great. It's available in all formats. And today we're going to talk to Allison Carmen. So thank you so much for being here, Allison.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. So I wanted to start off with asking you just to describe a little bit of what the gift of maybe philosophy is for those who maybe haven't heard of your book quite yet.
Okay, well, I think the best way to describe it is to have people understand how I came to the idea. For most of my life, I say that I was addicted to certainty. If I didn't know what was going to happen next, I projected things were going to be bad or they weren't going to work out. And I think a lot of us have that. The minute life doesn't go the way we hoped, the way we expected, we start to get negative, we start to get afraid, we start to shut down, and we start to fear that we're not okay, that life won't be okay, that the things we want will never happen. And most of my life, I was living like that. So I was always in a state of fear and anxiety. And then what we do is we write stories in our mind. Oh, if this happens, I'll be okay. Oh, when that happens, I'll be okay. So we kind of try to make ourselves feel better by writing a story of the future. So my story was that I was going to get a great job. I was going to marry this great guy, and I was going to become a lawyer. And then all my stress and worry would go away because my life would be set. And I think a lot of us have that. We're like, oh, when this happens, then I'll feel safe and secure. And I remember walking to work my first day. I graduated law school. I got a job at a really big law firm, married the guy. I was like, I've arrived. Life is wonderful. And I walk in, and the second day of work, they let us know they're firing half of us because it was during one of the economic downturns. And in that moment, I just fell apart because that story, I held it so long. I just couldn't understand, how was I going to be okay? How would life work out? So my anxiety level increased to a point that it was really hard to function.
Yeah.
And so I went on like this for a really long time, which a lot of us do. We live in states of worry and states of anxiety. And then one day I heard this beautiful story about this Taoist farmer. And some of your listeners probably have heard it before, but it's about a farmer, and he has a horse, and the horse runs away. And his neighbor comes by and says, "You have the worst luck." And the farmer says, "Maybe." But the next day, the horse comes back with 5 mares. And the neighbor comes by and says to the farmer, "You have the best luck." And the farmer says, "Maybe." But the next day, the army comes. Well, the next day, his son is on the horse. He breaks his leg. And the neighbor comes by and says, "You have the worst luck." And the farmer says, "Maybe." But the next day, the army comes to take his son to war, but they can't take him because his leg is broken. And the neighbor comes by and says to the farmer, "You have the best luck." And the farmer says, "Maybe." And in the Taoist tradition, it means things are neither good or bad. But for me, something about that story just gave me hope. Because in our minds, when something bad happens, we never imagine something good could come from it. Life could change, things can get better. So for me, this idea of maybe made me see that, wait a second, uncertainty is a place of possibility. Uncertainty is our best friend because we want our life to change. It has to happen in the unknown. So this little idea of maybe started to change my mindset. And first, it cut off the fear of the future. I was like, maybe that's not going to happen. But when it cut off my fear of the future, I became very present. And when I was present, I became more creative. So all of a sudden, my worry stopped about the future. And then I was more present. Then I was more creative. And then my entire life changed. So the idea of maybe is, again, uncertainty is your best friend because you don't know what's going to happen next. And in uncertainty, there's always hope and there's always maybe. And you could argue maybe things are going to be bad, but also maybe things are going to be good. And you give people a little hope and the world changes. So that's the basic idea of maybe and the basic concept of the book.
Yes, which I hadn't heard that story before when I was reading the book, and I was like, it comes off almost as funny as first, but it really is a great example of just kind of how you can put all these judgments onto what's happening to you when you don't know how they're going to turn out for the future. And you could just cause yourself a lot of unnecessary suffering. And we do cause ourselves so much unnecessary suffering.
Right. And even though we know it, like you and I discussed, even though we be aware of the suffering, we can't get out of it because we're so afraid that we're not going to be okay. Ultimately, that's our biggest fear. We're not going to be okay. We're not going to be able to afford our lives. Our kids aren't going to be well because we know that things are uncertain. But the minute you flip into the maybe, you realize, wait a second, it doesn't have to be bad. And in the first chapter of the book, there's this simple exercise. I might still do it every day. And you'll ask yourself your biggest fear. I'm afraid I'm not going to get that job. I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job. I'm afraid I'm never going to meet somebody. And the so beautiful is that you ask yourself, are you absolutely certain that fear is true? So what you do is you flip it. You can't be certain of your fear, right? We're so certain of our fear, but when we question it, we're like, no, I'm not 100% certain. And then you bring in the maybe, and you just write statements down. Maybe everything will be okay. Maybe that thought's not true. And then you write specific ones for your circumstance. So it's so beautiful is if you do this for 15 to 20 minutes, you're going to bring in some maybe. So even if that one fear still exists, you have some maybe statements that are very hopeful. And again, you give somebody a 10% hope, 5% hope. It's like gas. It just fills us up. And that's all we need to shift perspective and change our lives.
And that makes, and as Laura's saying in the comments, that it changed her life completely. And that's something you've mentioned. One of your best friends felt like it changed their life. And I feel like I'm hopefully going to embrace this more in my own life. We talked a little bit, I'm a very fearful of the uncertain, fearful of the future human being. And you've mentioned, and we can talk about it a little too, how you have a chapter that kind of addresses people who I'd say I fall into, where it's like, they hear about this, they're like, oh my God, that's a beautiful, amazing philosophy. And then they really struggle with the implementation. What would you say? I feel like a lot of people might fall into that group, whether they realize it or not. Hopefully they realize it. But how do you kind of help people go through that?
That's a great question, because for a long time, I didn't understand why people weren't getting it, right? And it's because they really couldn't see beyond the fear. And it's so interesting. One of these realizations came to me. I was watching this movie, Madagascar, with my kids years ago. And there was a lion and he was thrown out of the forest. And then in the movie, they show this door. So there's this big forest, this big jungle, and they show this door. And he just tries to get back through that one door. And that's what happens. Our fear is so big that we can't see around it. There's nothing, there's space. So in the book, there are visualizations, there are all these things. But I also think that when you're in this moment of complete fear, complete worry, where you think life can't change, I can't have what I want, things will never get better, you start playing around with these maybe statements. You write your fear statements down. You realize they're not absolutely true. You will come across a maybe statement that just lifts your spirits. Like sometimes for me, I'll say, maybe there are many ways to be okay. And all of a sudden I realize this one thing doesn't have to happen for me to be okay. And my fear could still be there, but I'm free to know that something else could happen. Maybe sometimes I'll have a thought and I'll say, maybe that thought's not true.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden I'll be like, wait a second, what other thoughts are there? So what you're doing is you're constantly allowing more to come in. And it's almost like a cognitive faith. It's like you're offering yourself faith in your mind. You're realizing more is possible.
Mhm.
So go out in the world when you feel that fear, question it, and you will find maybe statements that take you to a different place. And sometimes I just write them down. I also sometimes write index cards, and it always just reminds me that the unknown has hope in it. And again, once you do that, all these beautiful ideas are going to come into your mind. And then also you're going to experience the moment.
Yeah.
And once you start becoming present, there's nothing more beautiful in the world. So it's a process. And as you experience it, you will know it.
Yeah. And I really loved every chapter of your book has an exercise with it, which I really loved because they're all ones that I plan on actually trying out, because each one of them I read was just like, oh, wow, I bet that would be really helpful to do. How did you devise these exercises?
They actually came to me through my own life experience. Like the one I just read to you.
Yeah.
My younger daughter was sick, and I didn't think much of it. And I took her to the doctor, and this doctor started listing the most horrific things that she could have. And it was just like, I thought he was going to say, oh, she's lactose intolerant, or give her some acidophilus. And he was like, well, we have to look at colitis. We have to look at Crohn's disease. We have to look at celiac disease. And he's like, that's what I would say it would be, celiac. So little girl, I got home and I knew about maybe, and I thought I was going to lose my mind. This little adorable girl, and I know that people live with these diseases, but as a mom, you hear this, and that's how that happened. I wrote my biggest fear down. It just came to me. I was like, I'm afraid my daughter has celiac disease. I'm afraid she'll be sick her whole life. I'm afraid she'll never get better. And then I said, well, maybe, and then I wrote the maybe statements down. Maybe everything's okay. Maybe she doesn't have it. Maybe if she does have it, there's a beautiful way to live with it. So every maybe statement started to make me see, no matter what, we're not stuck. No matter what, there are more possibilities. To your last breath, you have maybe. And that's how literally that exercise happened. It happened through my greatest fear. And I think a lot of people, parenting is the place where I find parenting, love relationships, job stress, those are the things money that get people the most. So I found it through my own experience. And that night I opened up and it was beautiful. And I stayed in maybe, and it turned out she was just lactose intolerant, but it took like 2 or 3 weeks. And, but even so, like it got to a point that I knew no matter what it was, there was possibility, there was maybe. And that really was life-changing. So every time I hit another layer of maybe, I become more free. And then when you become more present, and when you're present, life is just the most gorgeous thing in the world.
I do think that lack of presence that most people have, because it's very easy, I think, in our current world to not be present. We live in, like, everybody keeps calling it unprecedented times, uncertain times. Do you think that this philosophy of maybe would really help people for just the very uncertain, frightening times that we live in now?
Oh, absolutely. Well, what's interesting is that I don't think life is any more uncertain than it's ever been. I think the moment looks the same, but it never is. That's the thing. So it's really interesting. Like we're living and we think, this moment's just like the last or just like yesterday. It's not. And what's so interesting is that if you understand that every moment is new, you are more the creator of new things in your life. So it's kind of fascinating. It's our belief that things are the same that keeps us the same. And then it keeps us in resistance because we just then hold on to the same and we don't realize life is moving forward and life is changing. And so when we recognize life is changing, we change with it. and then our life opens up. So that's the first thing. Life is always uncertain.
Mhm.
And yes, I think what happens is that when something happens that we don't expect, our first reaction is to resist. And when you resist the moment, it is like a free fall. It's like you cannot catch your breath. You cannot catch your ground because you're just resisting what is. And the only place to start is to accept what's happening, not to resist. It is what it is. It's almost like Lady Macbeth says at the end, what's done cannot be undone. And so in that moment, or it's raining out, and you can't stop the rain. So when we kind of understand that what's happening, we need to accept it. That's the first thing. But then the reason why, so if you accept it, you hit your ground, but then you could say, oh, this is horrible. Things will never get better. But we don't know that. We can never know. If you look through the history of the world, in the middle of the most horrible things always change. So it might not be your preference, but uncertainty is the unknown. And in the unknown are infinite possibilities. So one is acceptance. You cannot resist what is. That will bring negativity. So you accept, and then you go to the maybe. And you realize, I don't know what's going to happen next. That means life still has hope. And then you go to this place of gratitude. And then you say, okay, what is? What do I have? Those are your resources. And those are the place you spring off of every day. Because from a place of gratitude, we become, and maybe an acceptance, we are present. We see what we have. And our job is only to complete this moment and love the world into tomorrow. Sometimes what we do is we take on everything at once, our whole life at once. What's going to happen in the world? But seriously, most of us, our job is through gratitude and maybe and kindness is to bring enough love into the world to make sure we will all wake up the next day. And then maybe there'll be somebody in the world that finds a way for there to be peace in the Middle East, peace between Russia and Ukraine. Maybe that's not our job, but it's our job to make sure that the moment's complete and we wake up tomorrow and we try again. And so we take it on such a big level when our job is also very simple. And again, the best process is acceptance, maybe, and gratitude and kindness and love. And the day goes, and I think we find the most joy and the most peace. And it doesn't mean we're not going to feel. There are sad things in the world. There are things that are hard, but despair is an addiction to certainty. When someone comes to you and they say, I know things are going to be bad, they're addicted to certainty. They can't know. So they actually feel better saying A goes to B and B goes to C. But they're just addicted like everybody else because the only thing we know is this moment. And beyond this moment, all is possible. And it's possible through our actions in this moment. So I think that maybe is the most beautiful process. And through those processes, we will have more joyful lives and have less stress and worry.
Yeah. And that's something I've been very guilty of, where something doesn't happen or I think it won't happen, and I'll be like, well, this thing's not going to happen, which is going to lead to this horrible thing and this horrible thing, and then my whole life is going to be bad forever. For now and forever, because one thing didn't happen, which it's like, even when you're saying it, part of you has to realize it's pretty ridiculous. That doesn't make sense. There's no way that even if one bad thing does happen, like you don't get the thing or something bad does happen, that really doesn't mean the rest of your life has now domino tipped into being completely ruined in this exact specific way you think it's going to happen.
Absolutely. And when you enter maybe, you actually have more creativity and more solutions. There's something almost magical about it because presence, it's funny. If you want to create a different future, you create it in the present. So the more present you are, the more seeds you plant and the more different your future will be. And for you, it might be maybe everything is still okay.
Yeah.
Maybe things are still going my way. And it's funny, I have these inspirational maybe cards coming out in February, and I'm definitely going to send you a deck. But it came from this moment. I got really frustrated in this moment. I was at work and I didn't like something. And I, like a mad woman, I started writing maybe statements down and I got to 100. And I'm like, what am I going to do with these? And I had these index cards and I created this deck. But yeah, you just need a couple of beautiful maybe statements and you're going to see it's going to release you from your fear just enough to bring in the hope, and then your life's just going to change, because the minute you're unhooked from your biggest fear, everything is different. So you probably just need 2 or 3 maybe statements, and then you're going to have just a different experience with life. And then you're going to remember, oh, remember when I thought my life was over and I did those maybe statements and I got this new opportunity? There's not just one way to be okay. It's funny. I don't know who sold that to us. Maybe it's because we're very goal oriented and we're like, set your path, know what you want. You know, life sometimes has a different plan. And when we're open and we're in maybe, sometimes it's even better. And so I'm just saying, like, you know, I was telling you before that my husband left me about 5 years ago. And it was one of the biggest fears I wrote in my book. When I wrote this book 9 years ago, and I wrote, one of my biggest fears was, would my husband always love me? Never thought it would really happen. It was a fear.
Yeah.
2018, comes home, he leaves me. And all of a sudden, here I am with my biggest fear in the world. And it was the gift of maybe that saved me. But today, I have such a gorgeous life. And on that day, he said to me, I'm leaving. I thought my life was over. So we do have these moments that we're crushed, that we're heartbroken, that we cannot see a way forward. And all we have is the word. All we have is the word maybe. We don't know. But because you know it exists, every day you wake up and every day you try again, even if you're in pain. And that's what happened to me. It was a very painful road back. But because I knew maybe exists, I knew that the uncertainty would provide a path. And so today I have this gorgeous, beautiful life that I couldn't know 5 years ago. That's the thing. We want to know. That's what ruins us. And we think if we knew, life would be better. But the truth is, if you knew today what tomorrow was going to bring, you would never try anything new. You wouldn't expand yourself. You wouldn't grow. You wouldn't learn. Like, I want an interesting life. I want a creative life. I want unlimited things. And it only comes when you're willing not to know. So in that moment, if you know there's maybe, you just use it as a springboard every day, inch by inch, and life will show you the way. In my experience.
No, and I've mentioned that before we got on. I mentioned I have an older sister who I feel like sort of naturally just has this philosophy, and she's had a completely crazy life that would probably most people wouldn't have had this maybe strength to make the choices that she did, that ended up leading her into a pretty good place where she's happy now. She has wonderful friends who she would not have met had she not taken the risks and been okay with uncertainty like she did. And I've always been jealous of that. Like, I've seen her as this really aspirational figure where I'm like, it's so cool that you were able to take all these risks that I have never taken. And I showed her this book too, because I was like, I feel like this is very you, and maybe you don't need it because you're already living it. But
and now you have the secret.
Yeah.
Now you have the secret. So now, now you'll be just like your sister, right? You have.
No, and that's a wonderful thing. And that's, although also speaking of my sister, I read your Daily Beast article about, it was called something like watching Gilmore Girls reruns isn't the solution. My sister is a big Gilmore Girls person. She's the reason I watched it for the very first time last year. I'd never seen it before, because I just hadn't. And I imagine a lot of people read that article and felt very called out, because the watching a show over and over again is like a comfort thing. It's very much a coping strategy people use. So did you get a big response to that kind of article?
It's funny, I got a huge response, and I didn't even know it was a thing. My daughter, who's in law school, kept watching the Gilmore Girls, and then she told me that it was, I think, during when the Ukraine war started. There were so many things happening that she was so afraid that she liked watching it because she knew what was going to happen. And I was like, oh, it's just my daughter. And then my friend, who's like a pretty big lawyer, was doing that with Law and Order because bad things happened. But then they got the guy and she knew what was going to happen. And then the more I spoke to people, it's like a phenomenon. This is what people do. And it's not a bad thing. We're allowed to make ourselves feel better. It's just, I think I wanted to make people aware of their fear of the unknown and how there's a way to live that the unknown becomes more expansive and less of a fear-based thing. So I wasn't saying don't watch reruns, but
Yeah.
let's look at this fear you have and let's make your life more joyous and expansive.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said before, I think you said to me, if you worry about the future, you worry once. And if the bad thing happens, you worry twice, right? And
Yeah.
so how could we not worry and live our best life every moment? So that was really the purpose of the article. But yes, it went viral and people went crazy about it because I think a lot of us do that.
Yeah, and that's something. It's funny. I have a lot of friends who do that. I guess my thing. I watch a lot of horror movies. Horror is my favorite genre, and maybe I like that because in horror things aren't okay, and sometimes they end completely not okay. And maybe for me, it's nice to be like, it's a justification for my negative thinking, where I'm like, see, horrible things are happening. It's not being okay at all in this situation. So, but I mean, of course, there are horror movies that have happy endings, but there are plenty that don't.
Those are my kind of horror movies.
Yeah. No. But I do see that with a lot of people where I can't even get them to watch a new show because they only want to watch shows where they know what happens already. They don't like the uncertainty of just a television show because they're like, that's additional stress to my life where I'm already so uncertain that even just watching a new TV show where, we feel vicariously the emotions, but it's not like it will actually impact us.
Yeah. And we have to be careful because when certainty becomes the most important thing in our lives, we're not living a life of possibility. So what we do is we don't take the new job. We don't go out with that new person. We don't try that new food. Our life becomes, we strive for sameness, for certainty, but there is no certainty. So life will throw you something unexpected in a life that you didn't even want. So you're compromising, you're going for less to keep things the same, and then they don't end up the same anyhow. And for me, I'd rather be out there living an expansive life, living in the unknown. And when the unexpected happens, at least I know I'm out there and I'm trying to access every possibility. So that game of certainty, it makes our lives much smaller. So because we're giving into the fear, and life is going to do what life does. And so we might as well live in that infinite world to have the best, biggest life possible. So that's the trick. The trick is, do I want a certain life, which is not even certain, or do I want a gorgeous, expansive life where I'm going to avail myself to more possibilities, ones I like, ones I don't like, but the more I'm out there, the more I'm going to find the life that I enjoy. So to me, that's a better choice than the life of certainty, which doesn't even exist.
Yeah, and that was one of the anecdotes you had was about one of your clients who wanted to start this design company, but was told, like, for her age, she had way too much debt and she should just liquidate the whole company and give up. And she like felt very crushed by that conversation with that financial consultant and came to you and you were like, well, if you gave up, how would you feel? And she was like, I regret it for the rest of my life. And I feel like that's what we set ourselves up for. We're like, well, I'm going to pick this certain path where I don't risk doing what I want and then just live with that regret forever. Right.
And then what we also do is that when we worry, we forget that after that bad thing that could possibly happen, life continues. And there's a maybe again. I think that's another thing that we get so afraid of. Like if you lose that job, if that relationship doesn't work out, if you're still breathing, there's more possibilities. So that's another thing I think we do in our mind that we don't realize that beyond that bad thing maybe still exists. And I think that's what I really experienced when my husband left. I knew there was maybe, but it felt so crushing. It felt like there wasn't. But like I said, life is always moving forward. So we have to realize that no matter what happens, if there's breath, there's hope. If there's hope, there's maybe. And life will continue offering you something no matter what. Even if you don't like your life as much as you did before, there's still a possibility. You're still here and there's something to experience. That's one of the maybe statements. Maybe there's still something left for me to experience. even if it's not my preference. And then at least you're still making the most out of your life.
Yeah. And that is certainly, that just makes it more worth living, you know, like that philosophy. It reminds me, I saw once this person had screen capped a YouTube comment somebody left of somebody who said he was in his 70s and hearing a song for the first time and absolutely loved the song, and how he thought it was amazing that life saves some of these good surprises for later on when you think you've already discovered everything. And I feel like that's having an open to maybes, like, you know, later on I might discover my favorite music, even something as simple as that, or, you know, there might be something really amazing that happens if you're open to it.
Absolutely. My life is totally different than it was 5 years ago. And it's gorgeous. Was it gorgeous then? Yes. And now it's just a different type of beauty in it. And so, yes, we discover things every day. And even for me, like a new song, new music, walk a new way, I always know that if I bring in something new and I live in the maybe, I'll discover something new. And remember, life comes down to moments, sometimes simple joys. Sometimes it comes down to a cup of coffee. Sometimes it comes down to a walk. I think we have these ideas of how life needs to be, but it's really a string of moments. So every time we open up, we bring another gorgeous moment in, another possibility in, and then we build ourselves a new life. And that's how it is. So I again, but you just need to try it. So if you're aware of the fear, you're aware of the anxiety, you just try this, and the relief that you'll feel will be the beginning of a new way to be.
Oh, and another thing I wanted to talk about was you have a chapter based off regrets, which I thought was really interesting, and you calling regrets a maybe in reverse.
Yes.
Because I know I've had a lot of regrets that I do feel like almost hold me back, which doesn't make sense, because it's like, why should regretting something hold you back? Shouldn't that be just a mistake you learn from? But when you spend so much time thinking, oh, if I did this, things would be different, it's a waste of time that also takes up a lot. So I thought that was interesting and wanted you to just talk a little bit about that.
What I didn't expect is, out of everything I discussed in the book, that's the thing people talked about the most. And I thought people were going to talk about their fear of the future. And there's something about regret that people suffer so deeply because they truly believe that this moment is not right. What's happening was not supposed to happen, and it's their fault. And what we don't realize is that when I call regret a reverse maybe, is, let's say you didn't go into business with someone 10 years ago, and that person became very successful. And you say, and you're in financial hardship today, and you're like, if I would have went into business with that guy 10 years ago, my life would have been better. But what you don't realize is that a different choice brings a different life. And you have no idea what would have happened. You could have went into business. You could have made the bad decision. Something else could have happened. You could have crossed the street on a different day. You could not even be here today. What happens is that we celebrate that choice we never made, but we look at it as one point. We forget that that choice has many twists and turns, and we don't know what would have happened. So all we know is what the choice we made brought us here. And all we know is here we are today with the hope and possibility that we could change our life from this day forward. So it's like a fantasy, because we think that one choice is good life, but that one choice, like I said, has so many different elements to it that you truly cannot know. And so for me, I don't regret a thing, because I feel so blessed to be here. So this moment is only here because of every choice you've made. And if you know you have maybe, and you know uncertainty is your best friend, and there's infinite possibilities, there's nothing to regret. There's presence, and there's this beautiful, gorgeous future that you can create. So I think it's a fantasy. It's like an imaginary world, the world of regret. And when you get that, your life changes. And believe me, I could have regretted a 30-year relationship. And I know people who do that. And if I did that, where would I be today? I would be the most angry, bitter person. But I have two beautiful daughters, and I'm here today, and I'm healthy, and I have a great life. And so that was my path. No regrets. No regrets. And I'm free. If you live a life of regret, you give up your freedom. And our freedom is the most precious thing we have, the moment and our freedom. So, yeah, it's a beautiful chapter to explore and a beautiful idea to really drill down on, because when you do, your life changes. You're free. We harm ourselves with it, with regret.
Yeah. No, and that's certainly been my experience of regret, where it's like I know it's a completely negative thing. It's not benefiting me at
Yeah.
all. And I definitely plan on doing the exercises from that chapter to try and see if I can uh, relieve a little bit of it, because that's certainly something that I struggle with probably the most. And I guess I'm not surprised to hear that that's what a lot of people are also struggling with.
Absolutely. We're so quick to blame ourselves. It's my fault. My life is not better. And
Mhm.
it's because of you that we're both here today.
Mhm.
Every choice we have made in our lives has brought us together in this moment. And again, in this moment, there's this presence, there's this beauty, and there's this open hope for the future. So, yeah, it's definitely something, we're so into self-blaming and self-judgment and self-doubt. I feel it's all connected, when
Yeah.
we could really let ourselves off the hook because we can't know.
Mhm.
And you always have another moment, another choice, another possibility. So, you know, no regrets. That's how I live, and it frees me. And I hope that,
Mhm.
people really take a look at that, because it's a waste of our time.
Yes.
But I understand
Mhm.
the trickiness of it. I so
Mhm.
deep.
Yes. And I think that was also a nice thing about your book, is that it didn't feel like somebody who, everything came easily to preaching about how life should be easy, if that makes sense. You're somebody who's struggled a lot, and you can tell that that struggle is what informed this and what brought you to this point. And I think that really is helpful, seeing like, oh, this is somebody who knows what it is to struggle with all of this, and who also found a really beautiful way to handle these struggles and is now sharing it with everybody.
Yeah. I always say, beware of the person that wrote the book. They had it the worst. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
almost like if I wrote a book about it, yeah, and I still think that it's my Achilles heel. And there are moments where I use everything in the book. There are moments where, though, I am maybe. I live in maybe. Everything about me, I breathe it, I live it, it's me. And that's when my life is the most magical. And when I get stuck, I go back to the book. I go back to the maybe practice. But our fear of the unknown is the beginning of every choice we make.
Mhm.
So it's always about that. Like, again, where you go for breakfast, where you take a walk, the job you take, who you're with, every decision, you're always weighing out risk. So if you become this, it becomes your life philosophy. You're in this magical world of opening, 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 never stop.
Mhm.
And when I get stuck, I use the maybe practice. I don't stay too long in that fear. That's the beauty of what my life has become. It's not that I don't have fear. I
Yeah.
can get afraid about something that happens with my kids. I can get thrown off by something unexpected, but I find my way back. That's the thing. It's
Mhm.
not that we fall off the horse, right? It's how do we get back? How do we
Mhm.
find our way? And again, my podcast talks a lot about this because I wrote the book so
Yes.
long ago. Um, Acceptance, maybe, gratitude, presence. It's just a gorgeous way to keep letting go,
Mhm.
let go, let in, let go, let in. That's how
Yeah.
it really works. And we are the ones that we're self-limiting.
Mhm.
So yes, it is. I think probably a lifelong thing for me, and I share it because it's helped me so much. But again, I told you, my mother thinks it's silly, yet my best friend thinks it's the gift of maybe changed their life. So
Mhm.
it depends who
Yeah.
you are, what's your struggle, and it could really resonate.
Yeah, and that leads into an actual audience question we had from Laura. If your friends or colleagues use maybe in this philosophy.
Oh, yes. Well, I told you my best
Yeah.
friend's a lawyer,
Mhm.
And he said before maybe he was losing every case. Everything was bad. And now when something happens, he realizes there's maybe. So he doesn't get into that really uptight place. He says, I don't know the way this case is going to work out. I'm just going to keep trying. I'm going to find my way. And he wins most of his cases. My daughters are total maybe addicts. Yeah, I told you I had an interview with a woman years ago from a big radio station. She carries this book around in her pocketbook for 9 years, so yeah, and even at work, I also work part-time as a CFO and a general counsel of this company. The owner always says, and she's a psychiatrist, she's always like, maybe, right? And I'm like, yes,
Yeah.
maybe, because it's freeing. Yeah. So yes, it's, and I hear from people write me all the time from my podcast, which is 10 minutes to less suffering. All the time they give me maybe statements. I remember during COVID, early in COVID, this fellow wrote me, and he said to me that maybe was his favorite self-help book, and he had cancer, and he could not go to get treatment because his wife was autoimmune. She had autoimmune disease, and her mother was living with them, and he was afraid that if he went to the hospital, he would get them sick. So he delayed treatment for 3 months, and it was only maybe that was keeping him going. He knew that he wasn't stuck. He knew that things would change, and he knew he had hope. And he ended up delaying treatment, and he's fine today. But it was the experience. He knew it was like the fear didn't eat him up because he knew there was another possibility. So I hear from people all the time. So
yeah, and that's
for only some, though. You have to, depends who you are.
Yeah, and that was another question from Laura, that if you're teaching it to your daughters, nieces, the younger generation, because I feel like if we grew up, maybe, or if we raised kids maybe with more of this mindset, maybe, it might help them take a lot more risks than when I felt like we get raised very like, figure out your path. That's just the American culture of like, figure out your path, know what you're going to do. Go there, have your college figured out by your freshman year of high school, and then
take these classes. Don't take the, no, we are a maybe family. And, but I do have to remind them of it sometimes. Like my older daughter is looking for a job right now. And if she doesn't get one, it's just another maybe. Maybe something else will happen. Maybe you weren't meant to have that job. Life is long and possibilities are endless. So when they go back to that place, they remember that there's just not one way to be okay. That's the most important thing to teach our children, that despair is just an addiction to certainty, that we can't know that things won't get better. And there are many ways to be okay. Those are the two things I think help my children the most. So they are, they're all maybe'd out.
No, and I think that's a really good thing. I feel like that's something, because I mentioned I work at a community theater, and it's our second year of operation, so we're a baby in business years, and it's so hard to look at the future and feel uncertain about it. But I feel like this could help my workplace of like, maybe things will really take off for us, and maybe we'll get these amazing events, and we've already gotten so much community support, maybe we'll just get more, and it'll just keep going up.
And also the presence of it. Like, remember too, like, I've had people who have gone out of business and they never do anything again. That's it. And there are people who say, that was a gorgeous experience. I met all these people and I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do it differently. So remember too, there's a benefit every day for what we do, who we touch, how people feel. We're always looking at the long run, the long game. So this community experience has already added to everyone's life, and it has a ton of maybe. And even no matter what, there's maybe from that. It never, it's until your last breath, it's never ending. And, so it's already gorgeous, and like I said, at this day hospital, these women are very sick. And so no matter what happens, myself and the CEO, who's a psychiatrist, we say, we did a great job today. Life has maybe, and we love the world into tomorrow. And that's what you do every day when you work in that community place. Like, you're just adding to the richness. You're enriching the world. And we have to
Mhm.
remember that too. Sometimes we're so obsessed about the future that we forget what we're doing for everyone in the moment. So
Mhm.
so that's also an interesting thing. And I think the people who appreciate that, no matter what happens, they get up and they try again.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that is a really beautiful way to look at it. And I like to ask this near to the end of the interviews that is there anything I didn't ask you or that you didn't get to talk about that you would like to talk about?
Really just that, excuse that my voice is a little hoarse today, that people should try this.
Mhm.
If it sounds silly, oh, I'm going to say the word maybe and my life is going to change. Yes, this idea has transformed so many people's lives, and you just give it a try. When you're feeling down, when you're feeling worried, when you're afraid life can't get better, when you're so sure things will never get good again, question those fears. Say those maybe statements, even if a little light comes in. A little light is all you need to find your way. And it doesn't mean you're not going to feel sad. It doesn't mean you're not going to have a heartache, but you're going to know that life keeps changing. And within those changes are hope and possibility, and your life can get better and things will change. And maybe always is at play. And I have lived it. I've seen people change their lives. I've seen people live with no worry, with less stress. I've seen people create beautiful lives as artists, as business people, as parents. So I just hope people think about it, because at the end of the day, again, our job is to complete this moment, and we have a right to have joy and to experience our creative side and to experience the miracle of living. And I just hope that this adds to people's lives.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really beautiful note. And I also like to ask, what are you doing next and where can people find you and follow you?
Um, well, I have this great podcast, 10
Mhm.
Minutes to Less Suffering. I
Yes.
have, which is available on Apple and Spotify.
Mhm.
I have The Gift of Maybe, which is, available on Amazon and all major bookstores.
Mhm.
Now it's available on audiobook, which has been a wonderful surprise because it was published 9 years ago. So the audiobook
Mhm.
came out last month. I have this book called A Year Without Men,
Mhm.
which is a beautiful book about female empowerment. I'm coming out with those gorgeous inspirational maybe cards
Yes.
in March. And
Mhm.
so I'm writing new books and doing interviews. And again, you could catch me on my website, also Instagram, TikTok. I have a lot of great videos on there. And yeah, I'm around. If people want to find me, there's a lot of places to find me.
Yeah. No, and I've linked Allison's website, social media, and podcast, and where to get this book, either in print or the audiobook, and a link to her podcast. So please check all of those out. You could listen to the audiobook first and then listen to the podcast as like further research. But thank you so much for joining us, Allison, and thank you so much to everybody who joined us for coming today. Uh, Allison's books, as I said, please go and check them out in those comics. Please give maybe a try in your life. Even if all you listen to is this podcast, give it a shot. And thank you so much again, Allison. And please like, follow, and subscribe us for more amazing authors like Allison.
Thank you.